people's right in order to recognize that there are rights of these groups of indigenous people that are and have been in many ways violated by the process of colonization, of conquer of their lands, of their territories. The problem is that in Bolivia, the majority is indigenous people and recognize itself as indigenous people. In reality, I'm saying wrong. When I say indigenous, it's not correct. They recognize themselves as Aymaras, as Quechuas, as their nations. Indigenous is something that we use to name everybody, but in reality, we're speaking about those nations, those populations that existed before the arrival of the Spanish into our country, into our territory.
Yeah, you've spoken about the Aymaras and the Quechua. My understanding is that the Quechua are more than the Aymaras in terms of percentage of population. But describe them to me. Are they totally different? Are the languages totally different? Do you understand any one of these languages? Do you understand the other language? What is the difference, linguistic difference between Aymara and Quechua?
They are different, but they have also similarities, because in some Quechuas have conquered also Aymaras.
The Quechuas are the people of the Inca
Incas,
Empire.
yes, and the Aymaras were the ones that lived in the highlands of Bolivia. So you have parts of Quechua-speaking groups that in reality hundreds of years ago were Aymara speaking. So there are different languages, but not something that you can say absolutely with structures that are very, very different. That is not the case if you begin to speak about Guaranis. Those are languages that are not from the Andean region, but are languages more on the east side of the country. And now, for example, one of the first recognitions of this new constitution of the plurinational state of Bolivia is to recognize their language and their right to learn in their own language and to preserve the language, because if you preserve your language, you preserve your identity, you preserve your culture.
Which is your language?
My language is Spanish. I have always spoken Spanish.
Oh, you're a foreigner in Bolivia. You're an interloper.
I'm what we call a mestizo.
Mixed.
A mixture, because let's say you have 64% of the population that recognize themselves as part of one of these indigenous
But do you understand, if I spoke Quechua, would you be able to understand?
Only some words.
I see, okay.
So I wouldn't be able to sustain a conversation like this in Aymara or Quechua.
I mean, you are lucky that I cannot speak Quechua.
Yes.
Okay, tell me something about Bolivia as a country, as a people, as a linguistic entity, as a resource entity. What is interesting about Bolivia? Why should we at Fairleigh Dickinson, why should we be interested in Bolivia?
For me, the most important thing that Bolivia has is its people.
What's good about them?
It's something very... Bolivians have a very developed way of social organization that comes from centuries and centuries. You can, when you go to Bolivia, you can be fascinated of how the community works. The community that is in the rural areas, but also exists even in the urban areas. And the way it's organized in order to build, defend their rights, the way it has taken its self-conscious, the history of the indigenous people, of social movements there, I would say is something fascinating for any researcher in Bolivia. It's something very particular. Of course, you can see the history of Bolivia through its natural resources, because the history of Bolivia is the history of the exploitation of a natural resource. When the Spanish came, we had a city that was bigger than London. It was called Potosi. The silver mine of Potosi was the most richest mine in the world. Now, if you go to Potosi, it's in some way a very poor city with very beautiful churches and cathedrals from those days. After the silver, we had the tin, the rubber, always now the oil, the gas, always the history of Bolivia related to the exploitation of one natural resource for some decades or centuries. Now the most biggest challenge that we have as a government in Bolivia is to change that history. For example, now, of course, everybody sees Bolivia lithium because we have one of the biggest reserves of lithium in Bolivia.
Lithium,
the biggest one. But we say we want to change history. We don't want to again have our lithium be exploited and industrialized elsewhere. We want to do it inside Bolivia. We want to have lithium batteries, but lithium buses too, cars. Bolivia is a country that imports almost everything, even though it is so rich in natural resources.
Talk to me a bit about coca. I'm sorry to bring it to coca, but President Morales has made a number of statements about it. And what is coca and what does it represent in the social life? I know what it represents in the social life of the United States, because we are major consumers of cocaine in this country. But why do you think coca is a good resource? Why does the president of Bolivia say that it should be legalized and not be treated as a bad thing?
Well, one of the reasons that I came late is because coca leaf.
Don't tell me you were smoking coca.
Well, first thing is that coca leaf you don't smoke. Coca leaf, it's not a drug. Coca leaf, I have, you see here my pin of coca leaf, because we are in a campaign, in a process, because the coca leaf chewing, because indigenous people chew coca leaf since centuries. If you go and see, I don't know how you translated this to English, monolitos, this some kind of totems that are made of stone.
Stone pillars.
Stone pillars. And you see the faces, you will see that they have the coca leaf here in their mouth. It's when you chew, it sounds like you had a ball here because you chew it. Coca leaf chewing, so it's a practice that comes from probably 3,000 to 4,000 years. It doesn't make any harm to health at all. Why do you chew coca leaf? Because of a cultural practice. If you arrive to a house, the way to receive you in England is they invite you a cup of tea. In Bolivia, in a community, they will probably invite you to chew coca leaf. So it's a symbol through which people of a community relate themselves and also relate with others. And nobody that has chewed coca leaf has ever gone to any health center because he has become addict to cocaine. There is no case of that. And people chew coca leaf for centuries. And they are not addicts. You can chew coca leaf 8 hours a day for 10 years, and suddenly one day, because you have to work in a bank or anywhere, you stop chewing coca leaf and nothing happens. So there is no addiction. There is no, you don't smoke and fly.